Buenas noches. Si tenemos a alguien que esté aquí que necesite traducción en español, tenemos aparatos y la señora Blanca aquí que va a dar la traducción. ¿Hay alguien que necesita traducción en español? Gracias.
haddii aad ku hadashid luqadda Soomaaliga waxaad fadhiisanaysaa 27 iyo 26 anaana ku turjumi doona
မင်္ဂလာပါဗမာလိုကရင်လိုပြောမဲ့မိသားစုရှိရင်ကျွန်တော်ပြောပါနော်ကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်
Thank you. We do have translations in Spanish, in Somali, and in Burmese. Karen, in Karen.
Well, good evening. It's 5:30, so I think we're going to try to go ahead and get started. My name is John Weesey. I'm the board president for USD 457, and I just wanted to kind of make an opening statement and introduce a few people who will be doing some of the presentation tonight. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for being here. I love that we got a good crowd, and I hope we have a great crowd tomorrow because public input is very important to the board and to the administration and to everybody, and we want to hear from you. We want to hear your ideas. We want to hear your thoughts as we continue down this road and work on the best decision for USD 457 and to set our district up to be successful down the road for 10 to 15 years. So we appreciate your input. I also want to just thank you all for coming tonight because I know it is Wednesday night. Many of you may have been involved in your church or kids may be going to church or something like that, and you're sacrificing your time to come and be here and put your input in. So we do really appreciate that. This has not been an easy journey. It's not been easy conversations. Obviously, that's why you're all here tonight, is to try to learn and grow and figure out what's going on. But I just want you to know that as an administration team and as a board, we're gonna make the best decision for USD 457, and we're going to take input in the process of doing that, and we want this to be a decision that sets our district up to be successful down the road, and it's not a decision that's going to be taken lightly. We have a wonderful school board. Everybody on our school board is community-minded. They're very much involved in this process, and they want to make the correct decision for the district as well. So I just want you all to have confidence that these aren't decisions that are going to be made off of the cuff. They're not going to be made quickly. They're going to be well thought out, and we're going to have a lot of information and data to make those decisions off of. So anyway, with that, I just want to introduce Dr. Mike Dominguez. He's the superintendent here at USD 457. He's going to be doing a little bit of talking this evening and presenting as well. We have Robert Schwartz from RSP, and we have Jenna Wallace from RSP. They have helped us through the process of this. They've helped facilitate some of the meetings. They're not always easy meetings, but they've helped us in the process. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to them, but I just want to say again, thank you all for coming this evening.
Thank you, John. If you have been on the committee, we've had 4 committee meetings, and we invited 46 individuals. Leadership team is there, add that to the 46, and then after second one, we invited 8 more, so we have a grand total of close to 60. If you've been on the committee, you can stand, or or you can choose not to, but if you've been on the committee, go ahead and stand if you would, just so they can see who's actually been a component of that committee that's actually here. So, thank you so much. And we're Mr. Weesey and Anna and Blanca and Dr. Rock. Dr. Rock's our deputy superintendent. Go ahead and raise your hand. There's sign-in sheets over there. We do want to get a kind of a head count of, please let us know that you were here, sign in, and there's a pink sheet if you want to make a public comment. There's a sign-in sheet and then a public comment pink sheet. And that pink sheet has a number on it, and I'll just say 1 through 5, for example. Look at your card, look at your number, and then we'll say number 1 through 5, come on up, and then these mics right here, one over here and one over there, will be for those individuals, and we'll kind of rotate through that. So just give you a little idea on that. Our PowerPoint, we're trying to get that guy going, and it's acting up, but I'm just going to give you the short version of how we got here, and committee members that have been on all 4, or 2 of the 4, or 3 of the 4. When it happens, you can give input or not. You can give the linear data that has occurred to this point, or not. And then I'll use Mr. Shane Burns. Where's Mr. Burns? I saw him come in earlier. Where's Shane Burns at? Oh, he's way over here in the corner. He's our transportation director, for example. There's so many what ifs with this. You can ask him a question about transportation, for example, and he may or may not know the answer, not because he's not a learned person, but for every decision, there's a lot of unintended consequences. So therefore, we're going to have to get the committee to recommend to the board make a decision, make that policy, and then we can navigate from there. But the boundary study, we needed a boundary study. Last one we've done was about 2012-13, when this high school was opened, and the boundaries are in that setting, north of town and south of town, or the buildings that are somewhat to capacity, and north of town at Jenny Barker, we're having to do over capacity transfers, have to move some people out, so definitely needed to do the boundary. The duration, like I say, the first one, or the last one was in 12 and 13, and RSP was a component of that. When that occurred, we asked the committee, the board did, not me, the board asked the committee to look at the boundary, look at the feeder patterns, look at transportation, look at safety and security, look at grade configuration. In that first meeting, there was definitely a poll, and just from the committee members, it was just the information from the committee. Vote, what grade bands would you prefer? Is it a K4? Is it a K5 or a K6 model? Everybody voted, got that data out to everybody on the second one, but most of that was a K5. Actually, I think it was unanimous, K5, 6-8 model, and then what does that look on the 6-8 model? And then the boundaries can be drawn from that. It quickly came to more of what is a fiduciary responsibility, the financial responsibility. Committee was supposed to be looking at that per board direction, and then try to get to 75 to 85% capacity for the building capacity for, just for us to be full. Programming for the building, if you only have one section in that first meeting, what's best, 1 track, 2 track, 3 track, tracks meaning one section of second grade, one section of third grade, or multiple sections, 2 tracks, or 3 tracks was the question, and more than one in the committee's eyes was preferable. Also, we looked at licensure in that first meeting, the K6, 6-12 model for our intermediate centers. In 2018-19, there were, and if you were on that committee, raise your hand. Anybody on that committee in 2018-19? We did a committee, we did a reconfiguration committee. Karen Merle, stand up. So you correct me if I'm wrong. So in that committee, we had 6 to 8 meetings, 2 meetings to the board about what was the best grade bands. And then in 18-19 year, it was K5, 6-8. Yes? Okay, so Karen Merle's backing me up on that one. So that happened in 19, and I think they didn't move further. There was some possibility of, in that meeting, the next phase was going to be if we do 2 middle schools or 3 middle schools, that was talked about, that you're going to have to do X amount of expenditures to get KH up to equal, and the model of a middle school of 2 6-8 centers that are equal. And then I think they just stopped. So, and maybe COVID made that stop, or maybe it just stopped. I don't know. I wasn't here. COVID, Karen says COVID, so there you go, we'll go with that. But then, when tonight, the 17th, we're going to meet 5 to 7:30. RSP will run us through a lot of the activities and give you an idea of what the thought process was with the committee, with that data, with that information, just that information. I say data, take that word out, no data. The information, community meetings today, 5:30 to 7:30, and then there'll be public comment after that. If you want to, like I say, sign the pink sheet, and we'll go from there. And then tomorrow, the 18th also. So we do appreciate you being here on a Wednesday evening. We know it's a sacrifice, but we do appreciate it. There will be a board meeting on April 22nd, and that will be at 6 to 8, and that is more of a board retreat. The board still wants to, number one, when we first started, the board asked the committee to do a boundary study. Then it kind of evolved to maybe a reconfiguration, not just a boundary study. So we want to honor the committee and the committee's commitment to the district and the school, and that in fact it's kind of evolved and changed to a degree. Anything else I need to clarify? Committee members, does that sound right? And then the 22nd was not a board retreat until we definitely need more clarification. So I think I'm ready to pass it over to Rob or Jenna, whichever, and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dr. Dominguez. I'm Rob Schwartz with RSP, and I'll give you some tidbits of some history I have with Garden City as I work through some things that I want you all to be aware of. I have 3 goals for this meeting, for you and for us and for everyone that's here. The first is that we'd have a safe environment for everyone to engage in a civil manner, to talk about some of these things that are going to be personal to you, right? It's going to be things about the attendance area, grade configuration, schools closing, the size of schools. So that's the first thing, a civil environment. The second is that it would assist the community in knowing how the data has worked through the committee process to create the concepts that you're going to review tonight. The third is that you would be able to provide feedback in multiple formats. So in person is the first. The second, when you're in the smaller groups, in that small group setting. And then the third, ultimately, could be questions that you may have of RSP, administration, maybe even some of the committee members. Ultimately, we want to funnel your public input through the online survey that begins this evening and runs through April 30th. And it's going to be available in both English and Spanish. What I do want you to understand is it's going to take all of us to accomplish everything that we're going to talk about tonight. And some of this information can be quite controversial. Each of the stations are going to have the same maps, so you don't have to go to all of the same maps. And after those conversations, I've already mentioned, we want you to go to the survey to put your input in. Key thing, these are drafts. They're the starting point. I also want to set some expectations that will help the committee, the administration, and the board know better how to make the best decision for the district. I want you to think about this as, is the squeeze worth the juice that we get from the items that you're going to hear about tonight in greater detail? So things like the ideal number of buildings the district maintains, elimination of one-section schools, an ideal school size, changing the grade configuration, going to one middle school, changing attendance areas, students that are impacted by these changes, and then future investments in our building inventory. Those are all things that should come up tonight. More specifically, I know this conversation is not going to be easy for some of you. Some of the individual components are going to impact your family and your students. And we want to hear the value of what your input is in this conversation. I also want you to know that with RSP, we've been doing this for about 20 years. It does not get any easier, and for me, this is a more difficult project than probably some of the projects I've done in the last few years. And the reason for that is in 1991, my wife graduated from the original high school, she told me to say. Most people know her brother more than her. I've spent a lot of time in this community, and many days and nights, and I know maybe some of you out there, and I may be recognizable to you. Again, I know this isn't going to be as big of an impact on me, it's on you. And so why am I spending some time trying to give you some right setting of what we're going to talk about tonight? And I think it's because, as I would imagine, as you're talking at your churches, your coffee shops, you're trying to figure out what's real, what are perceptions, what are the antidotes that are coming up in those conversations. For instance, there may be a perception that you're seeing businesses expand, but yet enrollment has declined. And it has declined, and we're forecasting that it will continue to decline over the next 5 years. What I need you to understand is that as our team looked at the information that's in your community, trained planners, statisticians, demographers, mappers, we looked at your state data, local data, county data, and all of those things helped us understand what's happening. The most important piece was the local data. So some of the things that you have to decide as a community are some of the goals that your city, county, and the EDC have established. For instance, do you believe that over the next 6 years, there could be 1,000 residential units built? Do you think it's over 3 years that 1,000 units are built? Or is it 500 or 300 units over the next 3 years? Those are part of the conversation of what happens with your enrollment. I do want to give a shout out to any of the county or city persons here for setting those goals. Those set the vision for your district, and I'm glad that they've interacted with our team and for sure with administration. Some last things that I wanted you to understand that as we tried to look at your data on how we answered that question, because that's quite a range from 300 units to 6,000 units. So some of the things that we looked at got into things, what trades are available to build the inventory? Do we have commitments from national builders like Pulte Homes or D.R. Horton to build some of this stuff? What's the timing of our infrastructure, sewer, water, roads? Do we have final plats that are approved that we can actually see dirt moving? And then of course the economic outlook, jobs, right? So as I get ready to hand this over to Jen to walk you through some of the iterations of how we've gotten to tonight, I wanted you to understand that when this started out with the district, we started with an enrollment analysis to look at the enrollment, the demographics, and the developments. From that, it was determined that Jenny Barker had too many kids. So initially the conversation was, hey, we can take some of these kids that are closer to the city, move them to VO, and done. We wouldn't have a conversation like this. But as we look through the data, the conversations with administration and with the committee evolved to what amount of capacity do we have in these buildings? And how is that impacting our financial outlook of being able to provide the services for the students? And so we had to start looking at the utilization. And district-wide for elementary buildings and intermediate buildings, we're well below 70% from a district-wide use. In some of those buildings, lower than 50%. So we knew we had to do something different. Gina also had other conversations with the committee that kind of evolved things into some conversations about what equity might mean for a student. It's very different if you're in a K-6 building, a one-section building, number of students. How does that get into what the district is trying to do for the entire district? Other topics started to come up about the buildings themselves, what's been invested in them, and how ultimately can we enhance the experiences of the students, which got into the conversation of a grade configuration, of having it unified as a K-5, 6, 8, 9, 12. The last piece to this, with the declining enrollments, the way the budget is set up in the state of Kansas, that means we have fewer dollars to work with. There'll be some questions about finances. I'm going to leave that to the district to answer. My last point. While these discussions initially start out negative, the outlook of how to solve them has to remain on the students that are going to be in these buildings. And I need you to understand that when we're looking at this from the district perspective, we have to think about it as the entire district, not any individual district students. Specifically, we can't think about it as rural students, city students, small schools, large schools, English language learners, special education. It's all students. And so that's what makes this really challenging. And so we look forward to hearing your comments. I'm going to have Gina walk you through some of the stuff. It looks like our presentation's up, so thank you.
Thank you, Rob. All right, so I finally got the screen to come up, so hopefully this next bit of the presentation works a bit smoother with some different visuals. I'm going to skip forward a lot to get to my portion. What I'm going to talk through tonight is categorized in these 4 different parts. You're going to receive an overview of that enrollment analysis. Keep it very high level, but so you guys have an understanding of the different data metrics that lead into our enrollment projections. Briefly talk about our committee process and the recaps of our 4 meetings, and then go into conversation about what you guys will see at the stations and what the information you have in your packets. All of the enrollment analysis can be boiled down to this slide here. We're going to talk about the different trends of enrollment, talk about capacity and utilization, and talk about our trends of growth in our economic and housing outlook. In our forecast, we have different trends that lead to enrollment increase and some that lead to enrollment decrease. Overall, our forecast is looking at a fairly stable to slightly decreasing enrollment. Most of that decrease is at the high school level, with elementary increasing. In the forecast, we utilize our current boundaries, and so this will be one of the large maps at the station, indicating what our current elementary boundaries are, our current intermediate boundaries. So in this case, if you are in a K-4 school, you would transfer into a 5-6 building, versus if you're in a K-6 building, your boundary maintains from kindergarten to 6th grade. Currently, starting in 7th grade, we illustrate in our middle school boundaries, so all of Garden City students coming together at 7th grade. This visual here goes into the forecasting model and methodology of our forecasting model. So it's a view that is a planning area subdivision life cycle. What this illustrates is that all the data that I'm going to present tonight, and even more on the back end, comes down to each neighborhood and each neighborhood's relationship with students. So looking at each individual, if it's a single family, if it's multifamily, if it's mobile home parks, all these different variables have a relationship with students, and so we're looking at it at that granular level. And this also gives us the ability to say, if we shift this neighborhood from one elementary school to a different elementary school, what does that mean for our enrollment projections, and what does that mean for our student grades in future years? This visual just goes into what the point of this presentation and really boils down to its statistics. There's going to be a lot of data, there's a lot of different variables that work together, all boiling down to what is the most likely forecast for enrollment over these next 5 years. And you can think of the model almost like a lever. So I'm going to go through multiple different variables. Some lead to a trend of enrollment increase. Some lead to a trend of enrollment decrease. And how all these variables work together and what that final result is what the model is pushing out for us. For example, we can think about how in the last 5 years, we've seen more housing and population growth, and so that was an indication of enrollment growth. However, other variables, like cohort loss and outmigration, have outweighed those variables to create our trends of enrollment loss that has been experienced. So moving into one of our variables here, we look at our county live birth rate data, which has been decreasing year to year. And so this information comes from the state and is based off of the address of the mother giving birth. So this is all mothers that have an address in Fitting County. And over time, we can see that our live births have been decreasing, correlating with our number of kindergartners also decreasing. This is very regular. We're seeing this in most states and counties where millennials are waiting longer to have kids and having less kids. So it's more of a demographic trend that we are seeing nationwide. But we can see that correlation of one of these indicators of enrollment loss, where less live births indicating less kindergartners in the system each year. The thing to offset this variable and to think about how this thing could change to create a variable of kindergarten growth would have to be three different things that would happen. We would have to see an increase of live births in the community. We would need to see an increase in the market share, so the number of live births in the county enrolling in Garden City, or we would need to see more students migrating into the district that are pre-K or 4 to 5 years old coming into the district before kindergarten. We also look at our past enrollment. So I know this chart's probably pretty small up there, but this is illustrating our classes by grade. And really the main takeaway here is for these past 8 years, we have seen enrollment loss. So with our larger grades being in the high school, as they graduate and exit the system, they're not being fully replaced by their incoming grades, which is a variable of and a limitation of enrollment growth. We have cohort change, so this is looking at the movement of classes as they work through the system. So these red numbers here are illustrating the cohort lost grade to grade, where the district, in most cases, sees less classes move through the district. And our migration, so for as many students coming into the district, we're seeing the out-migration as well. In this case, those orange bars are the number of students in-migrating these past 3 years, and the green bars are the number of students migrating out. And for these past 3 years, we have seen more of an out-migration than an in-migration of students. These next two visuals look at the retention of students. So this is even digging deeper when we're looking at what is the likelihood of a kindergarten class this year staying all the way to 12th grade in the system 13 years later with that retention aspect. And in this case, we're seeing around 88.5% of our students retaining in the district year to year. And to put that in perspective, we have this table where we're just focusing on 2019-20 data, so 5 years ago, where if we look at that kindergarten class, it has decreased by about 35% to this year. So as kindergarten moved into 4th grade in those 5 years, it decreased by about 35%. We also look at the neighborhood level. So in our methodology and in our projection model, we'll look at the count change and the movement of students in the community. So this visual here is illustrating which neighborhoods have been generating more students per year, that's the orange, versus which neighborhoods have been decreasing in students, and that's the green. And we look at our student density maps. So these maps were very important to the committee that we worked through of what the density is located in the district. We're near Victor Ornelas and Charles Stone, those neighborhoods having the hottest student density in the district for elementary and our middle school students. You can see that heat bubble in the south. Moving into more of our community and housing metrics, we always use this graphic to illustrate how there's different things happening in the community and they don't always relate to enrollment growth. So that green line at the top is indicating your population. So year to year, you guys are seeing more persons moving into the community for that population growth, with the blue line indicating our housing growth. So more units, more people moving into the community, but that red line is our student enrollment. So illustrating that from this past 10 years, just because we're having more people and more units, it's not equating to having future students in the district. We also looked at the relationship of our housing units with students. So looking at a yield rate generation. So in this case, we're looking at the number of kindergarten to 5th grade students that are yielded by 100 single-family homes. So in the district, we're seeing about 20 students per 100 single-family homes. And we also look at multifamily. And so this really helps the model looking at in the potential areas of growth. What is that relationship based on past data of having students enrolling in the district? So around a very similar yield rate between multifamily and single-family units in the district. We provided multiple maps that look at the current housing market. So in this case, average year built, with red being the newer units. We'll look at median home value, so trying to look at that price point of the available units in the district. And our recent year built, focusing on the last 5 years of where have the new units been built and what's that likelihood that they are purchased and moved into with students coming into the district. This visual here is one of my favorites. It looks at our development over time. So going all the way back to before 1939, all the different residential units being built in the district. And in this case, we can see that really the district built most of their units from the 60s to around the 80s, where housing really boomed. Since 2020, we've seen around 200 new units built. And so keeping that in mind, where if we're seeing the potential units of over 500 units or over 1,000 units, we would have to come back to around that 1970s to 1960s growth potential to see that experienced in this decade. But that's what our next focus is what is that potential for future housing? Because with new housing comes new persons and then new kiddos. So in this case, we have this visual that looks at a growth potential map, green being areas that are under current development, purple and yellow being potential developments more on a 5 to 10 year timeline. And so this information comes from meeting with the city county as well as just using future land use and final plats to put together. All of those areas on the map have a potential unit count. And so we're trying to indicate how many potential units are from these areas, what do we think that relationship is with the students, and then based on the boundary, you can kind of piece all this together, how it comes together in that projection model. And then the last main variable that we use in our enrollment analysis is our economic outlook. So just looking at the potential of future jobs in the community. We know Empirical Foods is planning to add around 250 new jobs. So having that economic and regional draw variable factored into our analysis. So all that information and a lot more, you can see the full enrollment analysis on the district website, leads us to this overview of our projections, where you can see the past data moving into these next 5 years of projection. We have the district forecasted to decrease by around 170 students, with most of that decrease at that high school level. As I said, those larger grades graduate, not being fully replaced, the high school and total enrollment forecasted to decrease. At our elementary and intermediate grade levels, we have an increase forecasted to a pretty stable enrollment of around 3,450 students. So with that, I'm going to pivot and move into this committee process and just talk about the different information that was presented to the committee leading into our concepts that you guys are going to have the ability to talk about for the rest of the night. Our boundary process is here, so we started back in December, and we have had 4 committee meetings with 3 board meetings scattered throughout the process. We're at the piece for public input, and then moving forward, we have another committee meeting to hopefully get to a recommendation to take to the board. We have different roles throughout this process. So some of the data that was presented comes from RSP, some comes from the county, some comes from the Board of Education and the committee, and all of this information is put together working into this draft that we will present. The relationship that's visualized here is a concept that I've really used a lot with the committee, and it's the concept of ACE. So trying to think of, in all of our conversations and all of our potential discussion of what we like, what we dislike, we want to come back to this thought process of the academics. Is this plan best for our student learning experience? What is the academic culture coming out of this decision? What is the culture of the building and the culture that we're trying to foster in the school district? And then that economics fiscal piece of it, making sure that we're balanced with our fiduciary duty and knowing that the district has to manage this, all their students and all their buildings in future years. We also started this process with some guiding principles, and so this was provided with the input from the board, drafting out some kind of basically bumpers for the committee to use in that initial conversation. And we had boundary criteria. So boundary criteria is a really important term that RSP uses, and it's the different lenses to look at a concept map and say, I like this about this concept, I don't like this about this concept, and here's my reasoning. So we have 10 different criteria that we try to use to provide data metrics on for each concept. And what's really beneficial is when we get input from the decision-making body to prioritize this criteria. So the board met and discussed this, and they got input from district administration and some other personnel in the district, and was able to prioritize our criteria to these top 3, where we want our end recommendation to keep, in fact, fiscal considerations operational, students impacted in boundary change, and projected enrollment building utilization as our top 3 criteria. Moving into our committee meetings, the first meeting, we really focused on that enrollment analysis. We went through the full report and had the committee do some different activities that talked about the challenges in the community. And very quickly, this kind of led to, okay, this might be more than just a boundary change. And we wanted to talk about grade configuration, and we wanted to talk about utilization. So meeting 2, that's what we did. We looked at, really focused on grade configuration, where we left that meeting focusing on a consensus of a K-5, 6-8 model being best for our students and staff. We received some board affirmation on this March meeting, where the board did provide some more direct objectives for this committee to utilize a grade reconfiguration to a K-5, 6-8 model, and to target facility utilization of 75 to 85% at each grade band. So there's some fluctuation that different buildings could be above that range, but the target is that each grade level, so elementary, middle school, high school, would be within a 75 to 85% utilization. At our 3rd committee meeting, they provided their first view of concept drafts. So we had a concept 1 and a concept 2, and they were able to really dig into this data and look at the different objectives and the different pros and cons of both concepts. And then our meeting 4 that we just had, we had concept 1 and concept 2, and then a hybrid concept, which combined elements that they liked from both concepts to try to move the conversation forward. So we were able to review those, and then also just talk a lot about the expectations for our public input. So in this slide, just the kind of a conclusion here, we had some different levels of support throughout this process. So we talked about grade configuration, we talked about capacity utilization, and the committee, although different views from all different persons, had that kind of consensus of bringing these concepts forward to receive public input. So that's really what we're trying to do today. Everything is complete draft, and we know we have another meeting to even review your guys' feedback and make any potential revisions. So with that, I'm just going to pretty briefly talk about what you guys see on the maps and in your packets so we can move into the public input session. What we're presenting tonight is one elementary concept, and that's that hybrid concept. So this combines some items of the more items of supported concepts from concept 1 and concept 2. So we can talk through the different items that come from those and maybe some potential tweaks to even improve this hybrid concept. This table here kind of goes through the main changes of it. So we do increase our district capacity to that 75 to 85% range. And the different ways we do that, we really start with changing the grade configuration. So when we moved to a K-5, 6-8 model, we added 5th grade to our K-4 buildings, and we lost 6th grade in our K-6 buildings there was automatically some different challenges in those buildings that we needed to address. So in this case, we utilized Bernadine Sitz and Charles Stones as elementary schools. So first thing there, they needed a boundary. We had to draw a boundary for our intermediate schools becoming elementary schools. The next thing is we looked at what challenges in the current boundaries are there in a K-5 model. So there were some different schools that you'll see on the maps that are over capacity in a K-5 grade configuration. And then lastly, to increase our district capacity and relieve some of those challenges, we're proposing these 4 schools be repurposed or closed. So Georgia Matthews, Gertrude Walker, Jenny Barker, and Plymell. Next, moving into that 6th to 8th grade lens, we have 2 different concepts to view, which is a 1 middle school concept, where we would take some renovation to Horace Good and JDA to fit all of 6th to 8th grade, versus do we keep our 2 middle school concept, and when we move 6th grade into that boundary, you guys will see that at your large maps. So the maps throughout the room are going to follow this format. So the solid colors on these maps are illustrating those hybrid concept boundaries. The dotted line is the current elementary boundaries. So where you see a solid color extend past the dotted line is illustrating where there is change to those boundaries. On the maps and in your tables, you will have the concept of projections for buildings. So looking at the number of students that would reside in these new boundaries and in the new grade configuration, and what that capacity utilization is. So looking at a district-wide elementary utilization of around 80 to 81%. We have some buildings that are still below that 70 mark. And that always kind of brings the question, why 70%? Why is that number targeted? And in this case, what we have seen in research, that when utilization dips below that 70% mark, there are some challenges with the district to staff that building, as well as provide the programming and resources for those students. And so we're just illustrating when those buildings dip below 70%. In your packets, you'll have a student's impacted table. So looking at what the potential impact to your current students would be, looking at this year's kindergarten to 3rd grade. So if we're thinking this would be potentially implemented in 25, 26, 2 years out, that would be looking at the 2nd to 5th graders. So in this case, in the hybrid concept, looking at around 966 students to be impacted. And then also for the elementary concept, we have our students' demographic analysis, looking at the number of students by percentage in our race ethnicity classes, as well as ELL programming. On the middle school maps, I pulled this map up here just to illustrate that when we have a 1 middle school concept, it's all blue. It's all 1 school, so there's no boundaries, okay? So it would operate like the high school, where all students starting in 6th grade would come into the middle school. So when you guys go out to your stations and look at the map for the middle school, there's just the 2 middle school map, but we do have the data table there that would look at what would the projected enrollment be for 6th to 8th grade if we looked at a 1 middle school concept. The other big item to consider when thinking about the middle school concepts for 6th to 8th grade is that both options would mean some form of building renovation. So in this case, if we looked at Horace Good, this plan would assume that JDA would become the 6th grade programming, and then JDA programming would move to Kenneth Henderson, so you would fit all of 6th to 8th grade between the space at Horace Good and JDA. In the 2 middle school concept, with adding 6th grade into Kenneth Henderson, we needed to expand that boundary as well as build an addition on that school. So this boundary is what you'll see on the large maps, and it correlates closely with that elementary concept to provide what a 2 middle school concept would look like for 6th to 8th grade. In this case, we would try to distribute our students equitably between both schools, and the plan is assuming that a 10 classroom addition would be built on Kenneth Henderson. In this case, when we create a middle school and we change the middle school boundary, we're also looking at that feeder analysis, which is as a class, a whole school, say like Jenny Barker would be moving into a different school. We want to try to keep those school communities together in a feeder analysis. So in this case, in the middle school plan, we would be keeping all of our schools feeding together except for Jenny Wilson. So that kind of concludes a pretty high level overview of the concepts. All that information is at your tables and at the large maps. And we really want to stress this, that these are complete drafts and works in progress. They do try to address the board objectives, as well as take those 3 prioritized criteria. So fiscal considerations, students impacted, and projected enrollment, to think of a potential solution to our different challenges. And then have your input also on the middle school concept. What serves our district better, of a 1 middle school concept versus a 2 middle school concept for our 6th to 8th grade programming? So moving into public input, what we're going to do now is break out into our tables, and we have large maps throughout the station to talk about, hear your input about the concepts, address any questions that we can, as well as move into completing that survey. Like Rob said, you guys have 3 different forms really to create feedback. So of course, verbal, having communication with our team and with the committee members is going to be a great way to provide feedback. You can write your feedback if you feel more comfortable on sticky notes and large notes, and we'll record all of that and collect it together. And then the survey is going to be that best way to collect all our different feedback. We have the survey live for the next 2 weeks, so we're going to continue to hear from persons and continue to push that survey out for the next 2 weeks. Like I said, so this is, we have 2 nights of public input. Information is going to be exactly the same, and we lead into our final boundary committee meeting scheduled on May 2nd. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. D to talk about where you can go in your stations.
Thank you, Jenna. I'm going to introduce the leadership team back here. To what be your left is Jessica Northern, the CFO. Go ahead and raise your hand if you would. And leadership is just a component to give you some linear data. Drew Tone is Chief HR Director. Josh Guyman is over here to my left and would be your right. And then Dr. Rock is the deputy, Josh Guyman is the assistant superintendent. If you have a pink sheet and would like to speak, we did get some taken, but we don't have them back from you. So if you'll raise your hand, we'll come get it from you, or you can bring it up to Dr. Rock. So the pink sheet, if you want to speak after public forum, that's great. We just need it so we know when to call you. And then I'm going to pass this to Dr. Rock, and she's going to kind of tell us what groups we're going to get into.
So we have all of the tables with numbers to facilitate the small group. At those tables, we have chart paper for any questions or input that you want to provide. We also have sticky notes if you want to just add your note to a sticky note. At the tables also, for the facilitators, we have a green and red sheet. So if you'll keep it on green, if you don't need any assistance, we'll be walking around to provide any support. If there are any questions that you may need help with that you feel need to be answered immediately, if you'll turn it to the red, then we know we need to go to that table to help facilitate any discussion. So we have 1 through 27, and we do have our translators here, so tables 21 and 22. We will have Albert helping with translation in Burmese and Karen. Tables 26 and 27, we have Dika here. Miss Dika will be at 26, 27, and will translate in Somali. And we do have some Spanish translators. We will be at tables 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we can go ahead and move into the numbered tables for discussion. Thank you.
When you get to your table, you'll just discuss if there's any information that needs to be vetted to us or have delineated for you.
All the other ones are English.
All the other tables are in English. So if you're just at a table, that's fine. If you're at an open table, that's fine. And then you can get on the survey. It's in English and in Spanish, and give us some input on what you feel or what you don't feel or what you need clarification on.